Good day to members of the media and the listening public. The Ministry of Labor wishes to inform the public of the government's plan to make legislative amendments to address the long-standing challenge of providing a means for long-term residents to secure permanency in Bermuda. This initiative is in direct alignment with the immigration reform strategic priority to achieve a simplified, fair, and modern immigration legislative framework. As indicated in the 2020 speech from the throne, this government is committed to making revisions to the Bermuda Immigration and Protection Act 1956 that will advance comprehensive immigration reform by providing a framework for persons to obtain permanent residency in Bermuda. In August of 2000, a report entitled Bermuda's Long-Term Residents, a discussion paper was presented to the legislature by the then Minister of Labor, Home Affairs and Public Safety, the Honorable Paula A. Cox, JPMP. The report described the untenable situation of long-term residents who have no legal means to regularize their immigration status. 2 decades later, Bermuda still struggles with providing secure permanent residency in Bermuda. Long-term residents include persons in a variety of different personal circumstances. For the purpose of the legislative amendments, define long-term residents to include the following: persons who were born or arrived in Bermuda at an early age and have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda, persons who have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda, seeking to remain and who have continuously contributed to the Bermuda community, a divorced parent of a Bermudian child, an unwed parent of a Bermudian child, children of first and second generation permanent resident certificate holders who have been ordinary resident in Bermuda. In developing a policy and legislative solution for the issues of long-term residents, the government has identified 3 problems it is attempting to address. Problem 1 addresses the issue of long-term residents generally. Many non-Bermudians have embraced, integrated into, and contributed to Bermuda for an extended period. These non-Bermudians should be afforded some level of security to enable them to remain. This includes, but not limited to, persons who were born in Bermuda or arrived in Bermuda at an early age and have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda for an extended period of time, persons who have continuously worked in Bermuda for a significant period and seek to continue to make Bermuda their home. The government has heard the concerns from members of our community. There are many individuals who were born in Bermuda or being in Bermuda from an early age, call Bermuda home, but have no way to normalize their residency in Bermuda. The ability for some of these individuals to remain in Bermuda with their families is tied to their ability to secure a work permit. This issue must be addressed. Problem 2 addresses the issue of long-term residents who are parents of Bermudian children. Currently, non-Bermudian parents of children who possess Bermudian status must leave the island after the child's 18th birthday. In this case, the parent either takes the child with them or is separated from the child. This includes a divorced parent of a Bermudian child and an unwed parent of a Bermudian child. As the Minister of Labor, I have experienced firsthand the stress, anxiety, and anguish that parents of children with Bermuda status must face as their children turn 18. Currently, there is no clear provision that will allow a mother or father to remain in Bermuda after a certain age. It is never my intention as minister or the intention of the government to bring grief to a parent who simply wants to remain in Bermuda with their child. A parent should not have to choose between living with their child or leaving without their child. Problem 3 addresses the issue of second-generation PRC holders who are unable to pass PRC to their third-generation children. Persons who have obtained a PRC under Section 31A of the Act can pass the PRC on to their children, who are second generation by means of Section 31B. However, the children of those second-generation PRC holders, referred to as third-generation children, do not have residency rights in Bermuda, despite in some cases being born in Bermuda. This exception to this general situation is those persons in the category who are eligible to apply for PRC until 2022 due to the recent repatriation and mixed status families legislation passed in 2020. This problem also needs to be addressed. As a solution to all three problems identified, the government proposes expanding eligibility for persons to obtain a permanent residence certificate outlined as follows. Proposal 1, addressing long-term residents generally. The government proposes to extend the eligibility criteria for the granting of a PRC to include any person who has been ordinarily resident in Bermuda for 20 years or more. This includes persons who were born in Bermuda or arrived in Bermuda at an early age and have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda, as well as persons who have continuously worked in Bermuda and seek to continue to make Bermuda their home. Proposal 2 addresses parents of Bermudian children. The government proposes to extend the eligibility criteria for the granting of PRCs to include the non-Bermudian parent of a child with Bermuda status who has been ordinarily resident in Bermuda for 15 or more years. This includes, but is not limited to, a divorced parent of a Bermudian child and an unwed parent of a Bermudian child. Proposal number 3 addresses the children of second-generation PRC holders. The government proposes to extend the eligibility criteria to allow permanent residence certificates to children born to second-generation PRC holders who have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda for 10 years or more and are at least 18 years of age. This government's proposals seek to provide a more effective solution for long-term residents living in Bermuda. This solution will enable Bermuda's long-term residents to gain a permanent residency certificate. It also improves upon the repatriation and mixed status families amendments made in 2020 and supports the principle that families should not be separated. The government's solution to this long-standing challenge will provide a more fair and consistent process of securing permanency for long-term residents. Additionally, the policy proposals eliminate gender, racial, and financial bias by giving equal opportunity and security of tenure to long-term residents. The recommended time period required to grant permanent residence certificates to individuals who have been ordinarily resident in Bermuda is very conservative. Approximately 96% of the 200-plus jurisdictions examined have significantly shorter time requirements for permanent residency. The current application fee for a permanent residence certificate under Section 31A of the Act is $50,000. The Ministry of Labor believes this fee is not in alignment with the principle of eliminating gender, racial, and financial bias, as the fee perpetuates unequal access for persons seeking to normalize their long-term residency. As such, the Ministry of Labor has reviewed the fee structure and has determined that the permanent residence certificate application fee shall be reduced from $50,000 to $10,000. The current application fee for a permanent residence certificate under 31B of the Act, as it relates to spouses and children of PRC holders, will remain unchanged at $3,150. This government has taken the balanced approach needed to provide a simple and effective solution for long-term residents to obtain a permanent residence certificate in a fair and reasonable way, and provides a sensible solution to the identified problems. Although we are faced with many challenges, this government will remain steadfast in moving Bermuda toward a more sustainable future. The policy proposals provide a more effective means for long-term residents to be granted permanent residency, thereby allowing families to remain together and allowing individuals to continue to contribute to the local economy as well as the social fabric of our community. Finally, the government will shortly release a position paper on long-term residents to formally articulate the government's position as I have described today. Simply put, the granting of permanent residence certificates to long-term residents is the right thing to do. Thank you. The Minister of Finance will now discuss the economic realities facing Bermuda and the critical role of immigration. After those remarks, we will take questions from the media.
Good afternoon. I will start my remarks by thanking healthcare workers for all that they have done and continue to do in the midst of a global pandemic. Thank you for your courage, your dedication, and your persistence. Congratulations to Somerset Cricket Club for winning Cup Match 2021. And congratulations to both clubs, as well as the organizers, for your performance and for your dedication to the sport. I thank the Minister of Labor for inviting me to join him today. Immigration is a key issue in many countries. This is, in part, because rates of net inward migration into developed countries has been rising over the course of the last 2 decades, according to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. According to the 2016 census, there are more than 19,000 people residing in Bermuda who were born in another country, accounting for 30% of Bermuda's population. The population of immigrants is diverse, with just about every region represented. In the ongoing discussions about immigration policy in Bermuda, the impact of long-term residence on the economy has been a central point of disagreement. Because there are many perspectives, successive Bermuda administrations have adopted a piecemeal approach to resolving the status of such persons in Bermuda. The notion that the government can pursue international economic openness by insulating the economy from changes to immigration law is incorrect. Ignoring this fact demonstrates why it is important to accurately identify the current state. As with all residents, long-term residents add to the labor supply. They consume goods and services, thereby creating jobs. In other cases, they are job creators. More importantly, they are our friends, our families, our neighbors, people we see and interact with on a regular basis. For decades, a gap exists between those who are able to obtain a permanent resident certificate and those who fall under the category of long-term residents, as highlighted earlier by the Minister of Labor. The examples of inconsistent immigration policies are confusing, uncertain, and risk-averse. We have an opportunity to transition to a more inclusive society by prioritizing our social values in the same way we prioritize other aspects of our economic model to address societal differences. Bermuda's birth rate has not kept up with the aging population, and so our future prosperity depends significantly not only on attracting new job makers to Bermuda, but also on how we successfully integrate all residents into our society. The population of 65 years and older will represent 1/4 of the population by 2026, according to the 2016 report on Bermuda's population projections, published by the Department of Statistics. In 2019, the birth rate in Bermuda amounted to 8.2 live births per 1,000 inhabitants, according to the 2020 Bermuda Digest of Statistics. In that context, together with the government's aspiration to rebuild the economy in a manner which is consistent with its economic recovery plan, now is the time to accelerate immigration reform for long-term residents, with 3 areas identified by the Ministry of Finance together with our widely recognized specialists on international economics, the Fiscal Responsibility Panel, as follows: rising healthcare costs, rising costs of support for the elderly, and the underfunding of pension schemes. In the language of finance, it matters a great deal whether long-term residents play complementary roles in the local economy. As for other residents, our revenue model makes little distinction between a Bermudian and other categories of workers. We need to eradicate the notion that we are incapable of transforming beyond this state. Against this background, the government of Bermuda considers that a growth-oriented immigration policy should not be limited to policies related to the entry of new persons into a country. A growth-oriented immigration strategy should also consider persons who have already made their homes in Bermuda. An immigration system that allocates all responsibility for fairness and proportionality to lawmakers should also avoid the necessity for timely reform. Should not avoid the necessity for timely reform. In addition, in addressing the challenges caused by the pandemic, the government has identified 31 priority initiatives it will move forward with to accelerate medium-term economic growth in parallel with immigration, healthcare, and education reform. Led by the Cabinet Office, the Economic Recovery Plan will be coordinated by a new team reporting to the Cabinet Committee on Economic Development and the Premier. Work is ongoing to stand up this team. The government is working with key stakeholders to assist in the staffing of a project management office who will oversee the execution of the Economic Recovery Plan. Updates on the progress of the ERP will be reported regularly. With that, we're happy to take any questions.
Stefano Zenda from TNN.
Sorry, if you have questions, you got to step up to the mic.
Okay. Right here?
Nope, right here. Right here.
Good afternoon, Ministers. Stefano Zenda from TNN. How long will it take for these proposed changes to take effect and to officially become legislation?
The aim is to provide the framework for the legislative changes by the end of this legislative session,
Okay, which would be October.
by the end of September.
Okay, and this has been an issue. The issue of long-term residents obtaining permanent residence certificates has been an issue for quite some time. So, what was the reasoning behind taking action at this particular point in time from the Ministries of Labor and Finance?
Well, certainly this was a during speech initiative, but what we will say is a lot of work has been done since the year 2000, when the initial discussion paper regarding long-term residence was actually produced. We then had the work of the Immigration Reform Working Group, who actually provided recommendations. And so we are in a different space economically than we were in the past. The issue has not gone away. We've made a decision that we're not going to continue to kick the can down the road, and as a result, we're going to address the issue head on.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Ministers. Gareth Finnegan, Raw Gazette. Minister Hayward, the ABA, when they were in government, I think it was around about 2014, 2015, they tried to address this issue through their Pathways to Status program, and it got kicked down the road, largely in part because of the PLP opposition at the time. So in what way does your policy now differ from what the ABA were proposing 6 years ago?
I think the key difference is what you've articulated. We are not addressing any pathways to status. And so status is not a feature of the legislative changes or the policy proposal.
Sure.
What we're doing is creating a pathway for long-term residents to secure residency in Bermuda, which is fundamentally different from providing status to individuals.
Okay. Minister of Finance, you mentioned how having foreigners here is essential to the economy, and there's been lots of talk about how we've got to grow the population through having more people come here. But in what way does giving permanent residency to people who would normally be here for an extended period of time, does that in any way, could it in any way put a burden on the economy, in the sense that long-term residents would be here throughout their working lives, and then say get to 60, 65 and retire and go back home, whereas now they're going to be able to stay in Bermuda for the rest of their lives and into retirement, and then they wouldn't be so much contributing to the economy, but perhaps some would say sort of putting a drain on it.
Well, I would say, Gareth, that in light of the economic challenges that we're facing today, I'm moved to try to ensure that we maintain, at a minimum, the population that we have today. Inasmuch as there are productive people who are working, contributing to the economy, who have their status somewhat up in the air, I'm minded to provide greater clarity for those individuals who want to stay. It is difficult to run an economy, to run a government infrastructure with a shrinking population, especially if we're intending to maintain a certain level of service. And so inasmuch as we want to maintain a standard of living, a quality of living, we need to ensure that persons who are here, who want to be here, have a way of staying here legitimately.
Okay. Thank you, Ministers. Can I just ask some other questions on other issues? Would that be okay?
Well, this issue is this discussion, this press conference is on immigration.
Right. Is related to that, I just have one question for Minister Hayward. You extended the moratorium on work permits last week. What systems, and it's been now going on for 6 months, 9 months, what systems do you have in place to show that this is actually working and that Bermudians are getting these jobs?
And so through the Department of Workforce Development, we're able to better pair individuals with job opportunities that exist. We can also monitor the referral system that comes from through the Department of Workforce Development. I believe in a previous press conference I indicated that over 300 jobs have been gained through the referral system, the DWD referral
Sure.
system on the job board. And I believe that's a direct result of us creating capacity for those individuals to be absorbed into the job market. Moving forward, we have formed a working group with the Chamber of Commerce, and we will collectively work with businesses and industry to ensure that the policies that we're putting in sense make sense, that there is an adequate match for the supply and demand of labor in the country.
Would you be able to provide statistics on that? I think I asked you perhaps a month or two back if we could get some updated figures on unemployment rates and if it's coming down, or if at the very least more jobs are being created. Could we get some information on that, do you think?
There has been a commitment from the government to provide more timely labor market indicators. And so as those numbers come out, I will be happy to share them with the public.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Ciola Wilson, Bermuda Real. Minister Hayward, just in follow-up to Royal Gazette's question, so I'm clear, for the average Mr. and Mrs. Joe Average Bermuda, can you explain to me how is what you announced today different in any way from pathways to status?
So what the OBA administration was attempting to do was create a bridge for individuals to get Bermuda status. This paper, and what I've articulated today, provides for long-term residents to remain resident in Bermuda. At this point in time, there is no legal way for a long-term resident to remain resident in Bermuda outside of continuously obtaining a work permit.
So the issue of status, a platform in your party's government from 2017 when they got reelected and reelected again on COVID, still does not address the status issue, correct?
The PLP government has made no commitment to providing status to long-term residents.
You objected to pathways to status and got elected on a platform promising to address it. Hasn't happened yet, correct?
What we are attempting to address is immigration reform.
So,
and what I articulated in a previous statement was the 4 strategic priorities that we'll focus on.
okay.
Number 1, making the legislation fair. Number 2, ensuring that we strengthen compliance. Number 3, utilizing immigration to support economic growth and development. And number 4 would be improving the technology utilization within immigration to ensure that we have more digitized and automated processes.
So technically, admittedly, while you're the newly appointed minister, we've had a few years of a previous minister who was terminated for something as simple as this. Why has it taken so long?
I don't understand the nature
What
of
I'm
the question.
saying is the children of people, the parents of people, it's been an issue for decades under 3 administrations. Why has this taken so long?
And so the first step was underneath the previous minister, Minister Keynes, who did put legislative amendments to address mixed status families. However, those legislative amendments still left gaps in terms of areas of coverage. And I think this is the
This closes those gaps.
This is the natural second step. So yes, where we've identified some gaps regarding parents of Bermudian children in particular, where there still asked to leave after the child turns the age of 18 and there's no legal way for those individuals to remain, I believe that the solution that we've put in place will clarify that problem moving forward.
And last question for you, off the top of my head, you mentioned a reduction of fees from X dollars down. What was the reasoning behind that?
And so the way in which one receives a PRC is through job makers as it currently stands. If we put a $50,000 fee on all PRC applications, I think it would be discriminatory and prohibitive for a portion of the population. And what we want to see is a policy that is fair, that don't have any racial bias, that doesn't have any financial bias, or doesn't have any gender bias. And so I think that's the main reason why we reduced the fees from $50,000 to $10,000.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson, nice to see you. Thank you for acknowledging my team's fabulous victory over this holiday. We'll leave it there. Off the top of my head, you mentioned that you have some new economic advisory team. How is that different from the COVID or the other economic team that was announced during all of this pandemic?
What I said is that we will be running the economic recovery plan out of the Cabinet Office, and so we will need to stand up a team out of the Cabinet Office who will oversee the work that's being done on the 31 initiatives that came out of the Economic Advisory Committee.
I noted that you made quite a point about Bermuda's aging population and being able to extend. Would you say, in your opinion, humbly, whether or not this country is ready for the tsunami of healthcare issues related to elderly in this country, especially at a time when senior homes are running at least $5,000 a month with a waiting list?
I think there's a general acknowledgement of the challenges that we face with our aging population. I think it is well known by most people in Bermuda the spiraling cost of healthcare. It is well known that those costs extend into persons' later years, and that they have to find ways of making accommodation for that. There's certainly been something that the government has been highlighting over the course of the last my almost 3 years in this role. So I would suspect that generally people understand, if not through their own personal experiences, but folks in their family. So anecdotally they will.
But you as minister would know that, and we've had press conferences from the premier on COVID saying our health minister can't wait to get back to healthcare reform, which is over here while we're dealing with COVID. Is this country ready? Like, with the exception of COVID, you as finance minister with all this unemployment and benefits and so forth, where are we at with the deficit even? Can I just ask that question? And I'm done.
Well, again, this is an immigration press conference. I'll say this much about the deficit. We have got plans in place to try to manage the deficit, but the way to get rid of the deficit is to properly manage our cost and to grow our economy. And growing our economy is directly linked to the subject of this press conference in terms of getting more economic activity with more productive people contributing to the economy.
So you see this as a platform to getting to sustainability moving forward?
I think it is incredibly difficult to advance an economic policy that does not have as a standard part of its plank immigration. I think immigration and economic policy are intimately interlinked.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any further questions from the media? All right, thank you all for attending and have a great day.